Welcome, everybody, to Sail Faster, the podcast where top sailors share their strategies, mindset, and on the water insight that separate champions from the rest of the fleet. And I'm Pete Boland. Today's Sail Faster guest knows what it takes to perform under pressure, both on the water and in the boardroom. Brian Swingley is a mental performance and executive coach who works with professional and Olympic level sailors, helping them build the focus, the resilience, and decision-making skills needed to thrive in the most demanding conditions. Before launching his coaching practice, Brian spent 15 years leading collegiate sailing powerhouses at Stanford and also the US Coast Guard Academy, guiding unranked teams to national championships and shaping dozens of All-Americans. Now he's bringing that same championship mindset to founders, executive, and high-performing teams, teaching them how to compete harder, adapt faster, and stay clear-headed when the stakes are highest. On this episode of Sail Faster, Ben's going to share the mindset tools and the coaching secrets that help racing sailors stay sharp when it counts. Brian, it's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So nice to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, Brian, let's start with you telling us a little bit about your sailing background and your coaching journey. You're from Western New York originally, right?
Yeah, that's right. I grew up sailing on Seneca Lake on the Finger Lakes in Western New York. It's right across from Hobart and William Smith Colleges for folks that know that collegiate venue. We started sailing just at a small yacht club, learned to sail, kind of got into racing around 12 years old, skipped the Opti. I didn't even know that the Opti was a thing until later in life, and went right into the laser, which I was probably much too small for, but just really enjoyed the thrill of the boat and the speed at which I could go, and the freedom that I had at such a young age, I think. And then my dad and I started sailing on the local laser circuit, and we really didn't know what we were doing. We just packed a trailer, put one boat on the trailer, one boat on the car, and started hitting those regattas, and we were welcomed in. And that really, I think that was where I started to really fall in love with the sport, was that travel around with my dad, and meeting the other sailors, seeing different venues, and just learning kind of the more ins and outs of the sport on our own. You know, I didn't have a coach. Never once did I have a coach when I was a junior sailor. So I was sort of self-coached. And my dad, I have to give him another shout out. He was, if not last, very near last at every regatta we went to, but was cheering me on along the way the whole time. Yeah.
I was curious about that because you've got a boat on a trailer and a laser on the roof because you both entered the same regattas.
Yeah, it was a really cool experience. You know, we had nothing in it but just fun. And as I progressed, my goals got higher. Again, it was just the local circuit, but I started to, get a third place here and there, and started to notice some of the things that I was doing repetitively that were working. And I was noticing the practice that I was doing on the water was helping with my performance. And I think that was a key mindset that helped me from an early age. There were no coaches telling me what to do. My dad was at work during the day, so it wasn't him. It was just me going out there and doing 100 tacks or 100 jibes, or trying to surf waves from boats coming in and out of the marina. That was what I would do.
So you were pretty much self-taught at that point, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What drove you to do 100 tacks and 100 jibes?
That's a really good question. I never thought about that before. I bet it was some bit of reading that I was doing, perhaps Sailing World or something of the like. One of the first books I ever really recall getting into was Ed Baird's. I don't even know the name of it. I have to remember it, but it's a red book about laser sailing. And I probably just took some of those tips and tried to repeat them. Now that we're talking about it, it seems like I really knew what I was doing. I was also quite naive. I didn't know how big the sailing world was out there. I recall applying to the youth champs once. I probably saw that in the Sailing World magazine. And, if you're one of your top sailors, apply to the US Sailing Youth Championship. And I was like, oh yeah, I got third in this local regatta. I'm definitely one of the best, And
how hard can it be?
I just remember obviously getting rejected because I wasn't sailing in any of the national events or even international events, and kind of being confused, but also it was motivating. Like, oh, okay, the world of sailing is bigger than just this little lake. And that caused me to start looking a little bit bigger as well.
What drew you to mental performance coaching, Brian?
What I've realized is that the mental side of the sport was always what came much more naturally to me. Over the many years and the the coaches I had the pleasure of working with. And in the college sailing setting, you get to sit on the coach boat with a lot of world-class coaches. And so I would just listen in on they were telling their athletes, to be fully honest. And so the technical skills came. And I worked really hard on developing those and provided great value in the technical game for sure. What was always innate to me was the mental side of it. I think the team development aspect of it, the bringing performance out of an exceptionally talented athlete and getting them to think differently or raise the bar more than anyone ever thought that they could, just by learning what levers to pull for that particular individual. That always felt a lot more natural to me and interesting and rewarding, honestly. You know, when you really truly understand somebody, understand how far you can take them and raising their bar, it's really, there's nothing like it. And so that was just a natural crossover here into this remote work I'm doing now. I'll say I was skeptical at first if this could be done over a computer screen, but I'm finding that it can. And you actually have even better conversations because a lot of those conversations were just off the cuff or when needed. When I was coaching a team, but now it's with purpose and there's a formula and I've developed tools that I know work. And so now I will at some point, hopefully coach college again. I'm taking a break now. I have 4 young kids. And so I'm trying to be at home as much as I can now in this season of my life, but I'd love to return and see how these skills can even further develop a team. And so, yeah, I think it was just a natural progression. But I still love the sport, love the community, and love mental performance. And so it was an easy crossover, an easy fit.
I think when most people think about sailing faster, about boat speed, you think in terms of probably tactics and trim and perhaps boat setup. But why do you believe that mindset is just as important?
Currently, I have the privilege of working with some really high performers in the sport and in their field. And at that level, there's a lot of equality across the board. Some of the folks that I'm lucky enough to be working with right now is the absolute top percent. And so they've trained those things over time, those components that you talked about over time, the speed, the tactics, the technique. And so what really is the difference maker, in my opinion, is that mental edge. Can you get yourself to recover quickly under pressure, to make good decisions when it matters the most, and to do it repetitively over a series of a regatta or races?
Yeah, that makes total sense, because if you think about any sport, whether it's, sailing or soccer or basketball or cricket or, Formula One, right? What separates the top sort of 2, 3, 4 people or 2, 3, 4 teams is it's nothing. It's hardly anything technically. It's slivers of time or abilities. And so I get that it's the more skilled you get, it feels like the mental side of it becomes bigger and bigger as a differentiating factor, perhaps.
No, that's right. And if you really pay attention, all of the pro leagues, the pro professional that are individual athletes definitely have some type of mental performance practice and very likely have a mental performance coach. And the teams have sometimes a staff that are dedicated to this. And that's one thing that I think our sport could use more of. There's a lot of really great sailors who know that this is an important element of it. A lot of them have been on your podcast and I've listened to them. There's been some really good insights there, but they are still sailors, pro sailors. They're not the ones paying attention to this and learning how this work can intimately affect performance in sailing.
So what are some of the common barriers that you see that these kind of sailors come up against on the race course?
You'll laugh, but I think one of the biggest ones is how teammates talk to each other. And if you think about that Wednesday night beer league, Saturday races, how often you hear yelling on the race course, as an example, right? And I can tell by the way you're laughing that resonates a little bit, right? And what's happening
I wasn't
there?
a yeller.
No, I wasn't suggesting that at all, Pete. I wasn't suggesting that.
It's more other boats yelling at me.
That's right. So not only is it boats yelling at each other, but it's very commonly teammates yelling at each other, or the helmsman yelling at the team, or at least delivering their communication in a way that is not productive, right? And I think that that's one of the low-hanging fruits that we can start to correct across the board. In my work, one of the main things that we talk about early in any engagement is a concept called saboteurs, which are the negative self-talk that we all have. We all have thousands of thoughts all day long, and a lot of them happen to be negative. It's innate to humans. It's a survival mechanism built out of fear, and it gets in our way throughout the day. And so when those saboteurs enter, or what we're doing on the race course, they hinder our performance, right? And that yelling or that negative talk from our teammates, that communication that's not as clear as we would like it to be, or as productive as we would like it to be, those fire up our own saboteurs. And then all of a sudden we have like a saboteur fest going on the boat. And so everyone's performance on the boat is being inhibited by just the way that we're talking to each other.
So that's really interesting. And I didn't
Sure.
really make that connection between the yelling and miscommunication and that affecting your emotional and mental state and therefore affecting your performance. Really interesting. And can I ask you a question about how do you start off? Would you go out with me on a race course and observe it and then come back with a list of here's the 10,000 things you did that we can improve?
Well, most of my work is remote. I definitely have spent some time with clients in person, but most of it's remote because most of the work is from within. And the vast majority of the wisdom that anyone needs is within. And it's just a process of uncovering that through some deep questioning and thought, and then learning what drives that person to a higher level of performance. And so to directly answer your question, we would do this work ahead of time. What are your saboteurs, right? Or what are the ones that are activated the most for you, right? We all have this master saboteur, it's called in the model that I use, the judge. So we're constantly judging ourselves, we're constantly judging each other, and we're constantly judging our circumstance, right? So the judge judges the way that we got off the starting line, or the placement of the boat within the fleet, or the way in which the spinnaker went up or down, or the way in which a sail is trimmed, or whatever. And so the judge will say, well, that's not right. You're not performing it the way you should be. But this, again, is based in fear and negativity and survival, not in creativity or resilience or positivity, right? Which is a major difference. And then some of the other saboteurs may come into play there. A very common one with high performers is the hyperachiever, right? And so we are only happy, we're only satisfied if we're achieving that result that we want to achieve. And so the whole process is based in fear and based in survival, not and because we're only valuing our worth based on how the ultimate goal is achieved or not, right? Whereas if we're designing a process in which we're celebrating all the moments along the way and the development along the way, and we're very clean on how we're communicating with ourselves and with each other, then most of the time the goal is accomplished, but it's accomplished with a great more sense of balance and peace and ease, as opposed to that negativity and stress and restlessness that comes along with that hyperachiever mentality.
I was really surprised how many people who've been on this on Sailfaster, top sailors, Olympians, that sort of thing, who will often talk about the imposter syndrome as being a barrier to them. And that is that feeling that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm going to be found out in my next race, in my next, whatever it is, the next speech I make, that I'm not really supposed to be here. Have you seen that too? I'm just curious how widespread that is.
Yeah, I think that's very prevalent, not just in sailing, clearly, or high level sailing in life. There's a great mental performance coach that I follow named Dr. Michael Gervais, who just wrote a book about this. It's brilliant. And his concept is the fear of other people's opinions. And his argument is that the first rule of mastery is not worrying about other people's opinions, right? And only worrying about what matters to you and how you're performing.
That's very hard to get over.
It's exceptionally hard. There's no doubt about it. And you bring up a good point where I'm suggesting very difficult things here, right? Like the highest of the high performers are willing to do the hard work, right? You talked about earlier, The high performers are willing to put in the work in the gym and in the sail testing lab and out on the water, the countless hours on the water. And the most elite performers in the world are also willing to put in the hard mental work that this takes, because it's not easy work. It does take time. It takes some deep level of thought, and there's a lot of humbleness that has to come along with it. And additionally, we've spent a lifetime, all of us, our entire lifetime has been spent wiring circuits in our brain that likely are driven towards negativity, driven towards fear, driven towards survival. And so not only do we have to undo those highways, and so undo those paths that have been used like super highways over all the years, but we have to build new roads towards the responses that we would prefer to be having in those moments.
I know you coach top sailors. They must think that the way that they've been operating so far has got them to this point. I suppose it's that old sort of business thing about what got you to here may not be what you need to go further. Do you get resistance? Do people push back because they, as you say, you wire yourself to cope with anger, rejection, whatever it is?
Yeah, that's totally right. And I think the argument is perhaps you've achieved those great things because your motivation has been based in fear and negativity. But for one, how has the rest of your life been balanced along that way? How are your relationships? How are your other interests? How are you treating your teammates? And could you be achieving those great things while also having a really well-balanced, purposeful, joyful life? And the other thought is that if you're consistently living in fear and survival, eventually it'll crumble in some way. It's not sustainable forever. And so perhaps you achieve that great thing, but then what is the crash afterwards? And then how do you return back to normal life? It almost doesn't matter the sailor or the athlete. There is a life behind all of that as well. And it's how we show up there that matters, I think, just as much as how we show up on the race course.
I love that point because you could be doing brilliantly at a sport and yet be empty, lonely, and unloved inside.
That's right.
It's interesting, this, Brian, because it clearly isn't, jumping on a boat and telling somebody you should be kinder to your teammates, you should stop shouting. That's not what this is about.
That's
You're
right.
really rewiring people, it sounds like. How long does it take for somebody to rewire themselves like this?
The short answer is it's a never-ending practice. And that's not meant to sound daunting. It's meant to just be real in that we're built to naturally live in fear and survival because that's what our ancestors needed to be able to survive. Now we're in a much more intellectual world and we don't necessarily need those parts of our brain as much as we used to, but they are still exceptionally strong and the default. And so it is just like strength training, nutrition, hydration, etc., like anything else that you'd want to do to live a long, healthy life. Having some type of mental practice is also advisable. But at the beginning, I find that it's pretty quick to get to a sense of awareness.
I know this is a hard process and it could be quite daunting, but what's the process that you take people through? Because presumably people see progress along the journey.
Yeah, although I just said it's a lifelong practice. In the beginning, once you start to develop some self-awareness and some tools that you can use, you start to see results really quickly. And the folks that I'm working with, they're there because they want to improve these things. And so they put practices into place where they start to see things progress really quickly and see their performance.
What would be those things that you'd see typically you see early on?
Yeah, so the model that I start every engagement with is called positive intelligence. And I think of it as kind of a mental fitness boot camp. And so it really uncovers a lot in the first 8 weeks of any engagement. The model was founded by a guy named Shirzad Shamin out of Stanford. It's a world-known model, and it's backed by science. And what I love about it is it's got a huge practice component, and it's very simple. The positive intelligence model exercises 3 mental muscles. The first is called self-command. And so that is being in command of your own mind and it not being in command of you. We talked about those thousands of thoughts that we have on a daily basis, and it's taking back control of those thoughts and with purpose and understanding how you can, on an ongoing basis throughout the day, have command of your own mind. The second is called the saboteur interceptor. So we talked about the saboteurs earlier as well. They're things like the judge, the hyperachiever, the victim, the hypervigilant, the restless, right? We put names to all these.
There's a whole gang of them.
There's a whole gang of them, yeah, and they're all teaming up to ruin our performance on an hourly basis. And so we learn how they show up for us, right? So, you and I, Pete, might both have a stickler who wants everything to be perfect, but my stickler shows up differently for me than yours does for you. And so we understand how it shows up for you, not only when throughout the day, maybe who you're interacting with, but I think most importantly, how you're feeling it in your body. How are you embodying this feeling? And then what do you want to do with it? Right. And so one of the very first steps is being aware of your judge. And so this is an easy one people can think about, is just noticing when you're judging yourself, when you're judging a circumstance, or when you're judging someone else. And that's it. You'll gain a lot if you simply become aware that you are in judgment. And then, we have a whole list of tools that we use to then turn that judgment into productivity, into creativity, into something positive. But just becoming aware of it alone is a huge step that most people don't do. And then the third muscle is called the sage powers. And so those are things like I was just mentioning: exploration, creativity. One of the biggest ones is empathy. And it's typically empathy for ourselves along with empathy for others, right? You asked me about that imposter syndrome a couple minutes ago, and we're not being very kind to ourselves in that moment, right? We're not giving ourselves a lot of love in that moment. And so sometimes it's just simply, what would I like to hear from someone right now? And how can I say that to myself in those moments, right? Something along the lines of, I am prepared. I was chosen for this team. I am good at this job, etc. But most of us don't offer ourselves that self-care that really goes a long way.
So how can a racing sailor recover mentally from a bad start or a mistake in the race because it lingers? How do we stop that?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple things. For one, it's normalizing mistakes, right? If a team or an individual has decided we're going to make some mistakes today, and just saying that aloud as part of the brief, perhaps in the morning, or part of the intentions that you are setting for yourself, if you're an individual sailor, just acknowledging that mistakes are coming, right? Not assuming that we're going to have a perfect day. And I think that in of itself is a really big step, to just acknowledge that mistakes are coming, and then setting some intentions on how then you will deal with them when they come, right?
It must also lower the tension on the boat and in the team.
That's
so
right.
maybe it reduces that worry so you can focus on performance. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate answer is, if it's a well-established team, they have a culture around how they handle mistakes. And they've made these exact mistakes before. And they've talked about how each of them felt in the moment, and how they each responded in the moment, and then how that drove the performance in the next moment. Similarly to an individual, if they're an individual sailor, they've gone through these before, and then they've worked with someone afterwards who, okay, what was going through your mind when you were making the mistake? What were you telling yourself? And perhaps what do you think you needed to hear instead of what you were telling yourself in the moment? And setting that practice in place for then the next time that a similar mistake comes. So we've already rehearsed how to perform when mistakes happen on the race course, right? So we've established that we're going to make them, and then we've also rehearsed how we're going to handle them. A third thing is becoming as present as you can be in the moment. Like what's important now after a bad start is not debriefing the bad start. It's putting us in a position to take advantage of the next shift or the next lane or whatever that might be. It's, if I'm a teammate who's noticing someone really berating themselves about their performance on the starting line, it's me getting them to be more present and think about the next move, right? So what's important now? There's a great sailing analogy about, imagine that your boat has been dropped from a helicopter in the middle of a race course, right? And with no prior knowledge to how you got there, and then being able to perform and execute from there, right? And so whether you're dropped in the middle or the back or the front of the fleet, or, while spinning after being OCS or whatever, you have no knowledge of why that happened. And so now we just have to perform. And again, that can all be practiced.
I've heard of that helicopter analogy, and I love that. It's obviously an artificial construct, obviously, but it forces you to focus on, right, if I've just been dropped into this boat and they kicked Pete Boland out off the back of it, what do we do? What are we doing next? What do we prioritize next? I really like that. Brian, let's go back to sort of prepping for regatta, which I've heard so many top sailors spend so much time on mentally and sort of operationally as well. But what's your recommendation for racing sailors to get into the right headspace before the start?
Well, you mentioned operationally, and so I want to hit on that for a second. I think everyone knowing their roles and responsibilities before dock out and is key. Fewer decisions you have to make in the morning, the more that you've hashed out ahead of time at previous events or at previous team meetings, and the less that we're trying to organize the day of the first race or even the day of, the medal race or whatever, the last race, we're still sorting that out. The more that's sorted out logistically and operationally, the more space the team will have to think about performance. And I think it's really important to delegate who's doing what on the team. And that team could be an individual with their support group around them who's doing what, or it could literally be, the team who's doing what. And I think, I think it's really important that even the leaders or the perceived leaders on the team are willing to raise their hand to do the tasks that no one wants to do in those moments, as just an aside. I think I also think a really important component is setting intentions. Okay, so both the individual can set the intention of how they want to show up for the day. Right? And so thinking about their role on the team and what the team needs from them. And then therefore, what is my intention today? Is it my intention to be that calm, always there presence that is ready to answer the question, but not speaking up too much? Is that what the team needs? Or is it my intention to be highly energetic and motivational? Is that what the team needs from me? Right. So just kind of identifying the role in which you will provide the most performance to the team. Sometimes those can be voiced to the team, right? Like, here's my intention for today. But then it's also the team talking about what their intentions might be for the day. Okay. And it's hopefully not, let's go out and get a bunch of top threes or whatever. Okay. Let's make sure we are communicating clearly. We are accepting feedback cleanly, or checking in with each other, that we are all staying within our lanes. An intention could be first off the dock. That's an achievable, something that you can control, right? And then that leads me to it. These have to be things that you can control. And this has to do with going back to our early conversation about fear of other people's opinions. You are not in control of other people's opinions, right? You are not in control of your ultimate result on the day. There's a lot of factors that can come into play. What you are in control of is how you show up and how you do your job. And then if you're doing that well and consistently, that will lead to performance, right? But your intention can't be anchored on that ultimate finish that you'd like to have at the end of that day or the end of the series.
So, Brian, given your experience, you must have plenty of examples from your coaching where these kinds of mental shifts made a significant difference in sailing performance.
That intention piece that we were just talking about has been the one that I found to have the greatest impact on the team's performance. A lot of times a team that's put together of all pro sailors, any one of them could be in any other role on the boat and perhaps performing at the same level that the person that's in that role, or perhaps even better, or at least they know some tips and tricks and are judging that person's performance in the moment, and then therefore likely not 100% focused on their job and their role, right? And I think there's one specific example of a client I was working with who was bopping around at different roles and different teams. He was the head sail trimmer on one team, the tactician on another team. And when he really got clear on what his role was for that particular team and what the team needed from him on that particular day, that particular event, and set those intentions in the morning, he noticed that the performance of all his teams started to improve. And we can only control what we can control. We can't control our necessarily directly our teammates' performance. We definitely can't control the work that they're doing mentally, but if we are staying in that positive mindset in our lane, doing our job really well, then those mirror neurons start to fire for our teammates. And so you do actually start to amplify their performance, not by necessarily things you're saying or teaching or techniques, etc., but it's just simply how you're showing up and how you're choosing to be there with them and choosing how to support them.
I've been on boats where, on your own boat, where somebody starts criticizing somebody else's performance. It's distracting and it turns off the team for sure. And if you're driving or trying to focus and that's going on, you're sort of looking 45 degrees away from where you should be, that slows the whole thing down. So
what you're referring to there is just sort of a feeling, right? The energy on the team in that moment is being brought down by some factor, right? And it's something that you feel. I love that you said that. As the driver, you're trying to focus, but you can feel that there's some tension, or that there's something that's not being said, or something that is being left uncovered, right? But it's your job to keep the boat going fast. One of the most difficult jobs is just keeping the boat going fast. Ideally, this team has practiced this over time, that in the moment they can have some type of a mantra or something that they can say to each other to acknowledge that the energy is low, and then they have processes in place to then get them back to the place that they would like to be.
what this brings to mind, Brian, is that this is great for sailing faster, but this kind of mental fitness surely helps people, sailors, other lives, the other part of their lives, whether it's work or family or other sports and that sort of thing, I imagine.
With mental performance work, you're never just focused on your profession or your sport. It's a really holistic look at the human and how they're performing in all aspects of their life. It's really common with pro sailors, as an example. They live different lives. They're on the road at a regatta, perhaps doing boat prep practice, intense regatta schedule, packing the boat up, and then inserted back into family life or their personal life for a week or two, and then back to the next event. And it takes some constants throughout that to make sure that you're performing in both of those roles, again, that you'd like to perform in, right? And so I work with a lot of pro sailors who we talk about, how do you want to be when you're back at home? What are some triggers for you when you're back at home? Similarly, when you're at a regatta, what are some constants that you want to make sure that you're bringing with you? Is it the morning routine that you've set for yourself? Is it the workout regimen that you've set for yourself? The way that you're eating or hydrating, right? What is the constant that's going to keep you better performing once you return from this event? Because that sort of yo-yo effect, definitely of a professional sailor, I think can take its toll over time, and putting processes and tools in place to keep things as level as possible, I think is pretty key. And, you can extrapolate that to an intense amateur sailor, even a weekend sailor, same thing, right? We're out of the office at 5 o'clock on a Friday, hitting the road on the weekend. Are we making sure that we're doing some things that are keeping us consistent during this competition so that on Monday morning we're ready to perform again, right? And an Olympic sailor is a really interesting one, or an Olympic campaigner, because they also are a CEO of their campaign, right? So not only are they meant to be performing on the water, but they're meant to be providing their coach with good feedback. They're meant to be gaining sponsors and nourishing those relationships. And then I have yet to talk about their personal relationships and their personal life, right? So there's a lot to balance mentally there. And knowing which lane you're in any given day, sometimes any given hour, is really important of how you want to show up, but also what are the constants that I know I need to maintain.
Again, so interesting. In my working life, I had a global job. So, you spend a week in Europe and flying all over the place and coming back, and re-entry to sort of home life could be, you have to sort of think about it and sort of change gears for sure. I could have probably done with some help on that. Okay, so do you have one or two simple mental exercises our listeners could try right away? And I know you can't boil down the complexity of what you do into just try this, but just curious if there's a couple of things that you could offer.
The first is practice being present, whether that's some mindfulness, or some meditation, whatever calls to you. But the science shows that the better we are at being present, the better we are at performing in a present moment. It's really critical that this is practiced in a calm environment, just like you would practice your fitness outside of the game or outside the race course. Practicing being present has to be a part of your training. And so there's lots of ways to do this. A simple one is to just allow yourself to enjoy the morning without any emails, without any social media, without looking at your phone, to really taste your coffee or your tea or your water, to take a look outside and just see what outside looks like, what the weather looks like, take a couple deep breaths, right? And again, it doesn't have to be for an hour. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute meditation, but literally 5 minutes of just being present in the morning as soon as you get up, then energizes your brain for the rest of the day. And then, of course, you can use that same technique throughout the day, right? If you've got a short walk to whatever, down the hall or across the street or down the block, just be there instead of, sorry, Pete, but being on a podcast or going on social media, right? Take those 30-second increments that are given to you throughout the day and try hard not to fill them with something. Try to just be present. I think that could be a really, really useful tool. We talked a lot about intention and intention setting. I think that's a really big one. Decided ahead of time how you're going to show up and why that's important to you and why that's important to the team and to the role that you're going to be in that day. You've already done a lot of work there if you've just decided what your intentions are. But then it's also, how do you notice when you're stepping outside of what you intended to do for the day or for that event, right? And then that this is a little bit of the deeper work of what are the tools then to get you back towards what you've committed to. But the simple one is just taking 20 or 30 seconds at the beginning of whatever the task is. If it's a board meeting or a big event or a call with a sponsor, whomever, whatever it might be, just what are my intentions for this? And by that, I mean, how am I going to show up? How am I going to be? Yeah, and then another foundational tool that I use at the beginning of most engagements is this concept of MEDS RX, which is a guy named Brendan Bouchard. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's a high performance coach, came up with this concept. It stands for mindfulness, exercise, diet, sleep, relationships, and then your X factor. And so let me just quickly go through those and why we find them to be so important. Mindfulness is finding a way to be present every day. And again, what suits you? Is it just some breath work for 30 seconds? Is it a meditation? Is it a yoga class? What are the things that bring you some mindfulness? Exercise is an obvious one, but there should be exercise in everyone's weekly routine, I'll say, with some consistency. The science has proven that that's the most important, one of the most important things that we can do to drive our performance. Diet, very similar. And I'll say when I work with high performing athletes, they think they've got this dialed in, and often they do. But sometimes the question is just, how could your diet be serving you better? Or what are some things that you have been meaning to implement, but you haven't yet? And then those get implemented. Sleep, again, if we don't have enough sleep, our brain's not doing the work in the evening to then be able to perform the next day. Relationships, what relationships do we need to nourish to better our performance and better our teammates' performance? There's a really interesting study by Harvard about adult development and happiness and fulfillment, which all are drivers of performance. And the single thing that they found is the most important is relationships, is having good relationships within our life. And so we talk about that early, are there relationships that needed? And then I think one of the coolest ones is the X factor. What do you know that you need to drive your performance, to drive your well-being? Is it good music? Is it, again, similarly, playing the guitar? Is it reading? Is it being in nature? Right? What do you know that you need? And are you giving yourself enough of that? Are you dedicating enough time to that throughout your day or throughout your week? All those things not only will make you happier and healthier, but those are all direct drivers of performance as well.
Brian, this is fascinating stuff, obviously, and really useful. Just those 3 or 4 tools that you mentioned there are sort of very viable things to do.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating subject. How do we get in touch with you to learn more about what you offer?
Well, primary spot right now is on LinkedIn, and my email address is on there. And so folks can find me there. I also am about to roll out a couple pods that I'm hoping sailors will be interested. I think that the sailing coaches across the country could do a better job of sharing knowledge, particularly around mental fitness and mental performance, which I'm interested in, but just simply how do we all elevate our game? And having been a member of that community and still consider myself a member, I'd love to facilitate that type of conversation so that we can all raise the bar. But I'll say the real work is the one-on-one work, and that's sometimes the most difficult, is being asked the hard questions and being asked to look deeply within about what drives performance for you. What are certainly some things that inhibit your performance, and then how do we create systems and consistency around the things that are working for you that can sustain performance for the long term.
Okay, so I'm going to drop your LinkedIn information into Instagram posts and also the description of this, so people can reach you that way. So, Brian, you're a fascinating, inspiring speaker. This is really interesting, and it's part of the sport that a lot of top athletes bring up again and again and again as being part of what they do. Luke Lawrence talks about meditation a lot, and so on, and many others do too. But it's really interesting to hear from a practitioner about how these kinds of programs and models are applied. So I really enjoyed this time with you. Thank you so much for being on Sailfaster.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Pete. I can't wait to hear what conversations might come out of this. And so I really appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Great stuff. Good to see you. Take care.
All right, you too.